Power! The GTX 1080 needs no introduction at this point. It's been around for ages and it's fairly well reviewed. It's a powerful graphics card that's fairly efficient, and it's been near the top of the graphics card pile for a very long time now. And it seems as though it's going to stay there for the foreseeable future. Unless that new GTX 1070 Ti is more menacing than it should be. Now, because the graphics card has been around for as long as it has been, there are quite a lot of variants of it on the market. The one that I'm going to be looking at today is from a less well-known manufacturer called Palit. These graphics cards aren't very popular in the West, but here in the East they're everywhere. And online retailers have them for really good specials quite often, so it means you can get a really powerful graphics card for fairly cheaply. The one that I have today is called the Super JetStream, which is their kind of Strix model. It's got an 8+2 power phase design, and it comes factory overclocked and with a huge cooler that's pretty efficient at keeping the graphics card cool. Although out of the box, one of the fins in the kind of aluminium heatsink array was bent slightly. That isn't a huge issue though, because the temperatures in the graphics card are pretty great. It's pretty hard to push the graphics card over about 70 degrees Celsius, even with a fairly healthy overclock on it. As far as overclocks go, I could get the graphics card to about 2080 on the core clock, which isn't super high, but I think the power supply in the PC might be a limiting factor because it's only a 550 watt power supply and the processor is quite heavily overclocked as well. So I'll put it in a PC with a bigger power supply at some point and see if I can push it further. As far as the memory overclock goes, I got it to about 5850, where it's stable. I really like the design of the backplate as well. It's really understated and minimalist. It's basically just black with a slight brushed finish. When it comes to the RGB craze, this graphics card delivers slightly. It's got a small RGB lit logo on the side of the graphics card, which has very even lighting. I think it looks quite nice. It's not nearly as overkill as something on some of the Gigabyte or Asus variants. But I think it looks really nice. I actually prefer the more understated look. The software is called Thundermaster, and it's useful, but it's not nearly as comprehensive as something like AuraSync from Asus. It takes a bit of a clicking around, but you can pretty much figure it out in under a minute. When you get into the control panel for the colors, you can change to any solid color on the RGB spectrum, or you can change to a temperature setting, which, you know, it's green when it's cool and it goes up to red when you're reaching kind of throttling temperatures. You can also do a rainbow setting, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's not as flamboyant as some of the other variants where you have these really dazzling light displays. It pretty much just cycles through the colors. But again, RGB is not the be-all and end-all of a graphics card, I feel. And with that out the way, let's have a quick look at the benchmarks. And after having looked at those benchmarks, I think it's pretty clear that this graphics card overclocks really well, and it gains a lot of performance from overclocking. This actual variant of the card is already factory overclocked, so the stock speeds are with the factory overclock on it. So the overclock on top of that is beyond that still, so there's still quite a lot of headroom for overclocking left. Now, the graphics card is definitely overkill for 1080p unless you're doing like 140 frames per second. Then it's actually in quite a good position for that. If you move up to 1440p, it performs quite well. I wasn't able to test everything at 1440p because I don't actually have a high resolution monitor, and for some reason a bunch of the games wouldn't really work when upscaled to 1440p. but there isn't a huge performance hit going to 1440p from 1080p. Although if you're trying to do 120Hz 1440p, it's not going to be quite enough for that. When moving on to 1080p, this is where the graphics card starts to struggle a bit. You're not going to be getting 60 frames per second at ultra settings on the modern games, but you're still going to be doing fairly well, and all the games were playable at 4K. And one of the things with these settings is that with the ultra presets on all of these games, they actually ramp up the anti-aliasing quite a lot. And at 4K, anti-aliasing really isn't necessary. So if you switch that off, I actually found there was quite a big jump in performance, and it meant that some of the games went from being below 60 frames per second to about 60 frames per second. And yeah, I don't have a 4K monitor, so I can't actually comment on what effect that actually had on the visual performance of the games. In conclusion, I really like the GTX 1080, and I really like this Palit variant of the GTX 1080. It's got a great cooler on it, which is quiet and very effective. It's pretty difficult to push the graphics card into high temperatures, and you pretty much never hear it. It's basically the quietest component in the PC that I tested it in, while remaining very cool. The graphics card is actually one of the cheapest variants you can find of the 1080, especially here in Japan, where yeah, you get a great graphics card for a great price. One of the things about the cooler though is that it is a 2.5 slot cooler, which might be an issue for some people, but I don't really think it's that big of a problem, because I don't know of any modern motherboards that only have their PCI Express slots separated by one middle slot. It's usually at least 2 slots apart, so the 2.5 slot thing shouldn't be an issue. EK also makes a water block for the graphics card, which I have, and I'm going to be liquid cooling it fairly soon. And I'm fairly interested to see how much of an increase in overclocking performance you can actually get from the graphics card, having it water cooled as opposed to just air cooled. So that'll be quite exciting to have a look, and look out for that video in the future. If you like this video, do like and please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future up and coming builds or reviews of other products. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.